From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano and John Meoli live on a Tuesday in May. The Orioles are winners of 3 in a row. That's right. They're back in the win column. We are going to discuss what we've seen from the Orioles recently. We're also going to dive into the hitting philosophy around this organization. What is it? How is it instilled? And who are some of the people that are putting it in place? And frankly, why hasn't it been all that effective this season? All that and much, much more. But first, let's get a quick word from our sponsor.
For the 5th year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, John, we're live on YouTube, on X. Give us a like, give us a thumbs up. Write us a 5-star review, and I'll read it out here on the show. I ran into a listener the other day, John, in the grocery store, and unfortunately, I was donning a Washington Nationals quarter zip.
Wow.
And I'll tell you why. I am not a fan of the Washington Nationals. It's not like I dislike them, but I'm just, they're not my preferred team.
Yeah.
I haven't covered them in a few years, but I have all these things in my closet that I have from my Masson days for both the Orioles and Nationals that, let's just say I purchased on my own. I was not incentivized by
I understand how that works.
Yeah. So I have all these things in my closet, and on an off day like yesterday where I'm not working, I want to break them out. They're nice pieces of clothing. And so I don't want them to just sit in my closet the whole time. So I threw on a quarter zip, a Nats quarter zip, and ran into a follower of the Banner Baseball Show wearing a Nats quarter zip and had to explain, no, this is from my podcast day. This is Masson. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's always a tough look.
That is a tough look. I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah, but you make it clear that you're never wearing team affiliated gear out in public. You don't want to be caught doing that. You're a smart man.
That's correct. Yeah, you try to. I always think that, like, when this phase of my life is over, which I guess we've already tried to do once and it didn't actually happen. I'm going to have like
everything. Time you think you're out, they really back in.
Yeah, I'm gonna have really cool stuff to wear to Orioles games with my family when that comes.
Yeah,
it's going to smell like my basement, which smells like a cat, and dirt. But I will wash them and then I'll wear them to games at some point in my life.
Yeah, because the amount of free stuff that you're given over the years from covering Orioles games has got to be just boxes full.
Yeah, there's a large bin, and anytime anybody comes and visits, they get to scoop out of the bin. Sometimes I'm like, you can keep that. Sometimes I'm like, you are not keeping that. The Hyunsu Kim Korean print jersey.
That's awesome.
No one's taking that. That I might as well use that as like a lovey to sleep with at night.
That is really
but that's probably the best. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, also, if you were listening on podcast platforms, anywhere that you get your podcast, I did make a screw up. I did accidentally upload my last episode with the same file name as the episode that we did after Brandon Hyde got fired, and it replaced it briefly. It was a whole thing. Anyway, if you're listening on a podcast platform, go and watch the version on YouTube. If you're hearing duplicate podcasts, that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, cool.
All right.
I'm listening a lot.
Yeah, you were going back. John is grinding the tape with all of these podcasts. All right, we're going to talk about the Orioles hitting philosophies in just a bit. But first, let's talk about how this team has been playing recently, because honestly, John, not bad. Mike Elias has taken a lot of L's through the first couple months of the season. He's taken some minor dubs recently. Some acquisitions during the past offseason have actually been performing closer to the standards that he and others have expected. Charlie Morton, with a quality start yesterday in his return to the rotation. And how about Dylan Carlson, another under-the-radar acquisition for outfield depth, has been playing phenomenally with a 3-run homer yesterday against his former club. These are guys that the Orioles weren't expecting massive things from, but they weren't expecting them to be as horrible to start the 2025 season as they have been. And finally, they are performing closer to the expected outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, all I'll say is we were out in our neighborhood yesterday, and one of my neighbors, who's an Orioles fan, said that based on them winning in like the 5th inning of yesterday's game, he put like $10 on them to make the playoffs. He was like, are we back? Are we back? And I said, who knows?
People are just looking for anything right now.
It's definitely possible. Dylan Carlson is somebody who, he was signed for $1 million on a deal that was very clearly going to have him up and down. I think the way his career has gone over the last couple of years is that he's had a lot of different voices. He's had a lot of different messages and philosophies. And even though he's been up and down, I think with the Orioles, I think that the consistency of what they do in AAA with Mike Montville, the big league guys, are able to get him into a little bit of a better place. He is, I think most of his production has come against righties in this little pocket of playing time he's gotten, which is, the Ramon Laureano corollary. It's like you were signed to hit lefties but go hit righties too. That's okay. But if Dylan Carlson is going to start hitting righties, which he did in spring training, decent amount, which he did in Norfolk, I believe, to an extent, that's a pretty good player. I mean, even when he wasn't getting any hits, literally for a month and a half, not getting any hits anytime he got the opportunity, I feel like there were a handful of defensive replacement catches when you're like, oh, that would have fallen in an inning ago if he wasn't out there. And, that's not a huge, contribution to a team that's in the position it's in, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
And now he is rounding into form. This wasn't always going to happen. I'm going to say this is always going to happen, but it's not really true. This was what was going to happen, is that this team the ball would start rolling downhill, and then they get Jordan Westberg starting to push it back and Colton Cowser to start pushing it down. All of a sudden, this ball's going to start going really fast downhill. The problem is that the ball also is glued together and shattered because they basically broke their season the first 6 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I think on a future episode, if they continue to win, we can have a discussion of, okay, what do they really need to do in order to get themselves back into this? If they really want to mount a comeback, where do they need to be by the All-Star break? Where do they need to be by the trade deadline in order to convince us and in order to convince the front office that they can actually do this thing? But for now, 3 wins in a row. I think people are just kind of looking for anything. You're looking for signs of life.
Yeah.
They got some signs of life from Trevor Rogers, another minor Mike Elias W over the weekend when he pitched at Fenway. 6 1/3 innings of scoreless baseball against the Boston Red Sox. Interestingly enough, his velocity was up to 93.3 average, according to StatCast, on his four-seam fastball, which he was throwing almost half the time. Last year, he threw it probably the least amount in his career. He was really going away from that fastball, and the velocity had been dipping. So to see the fastball have more life, to see him play off of it a lot better, I'm not going to say Trevor Rogers is back, John, but this is certainly a good sign for a guy that we were expecting to contribute absolutely nothing this season to the big league rotation.
Yeah, Wee's doing a lot of work there, I think. Trevor Rogers made 4 starts after the trade last year. Yeah, Trevor Rogers.
We knew that he was going to pitch at some point. I was not expecting positive results. I'll say that.
Yeah.
If he was going to pitch, I was expecting similar to what we saw last year, which was 4 pretty disastrous starts.
Yeah. This goes in being the Craig Kimbrell guy category of just by virtue of not hating Craig Kimbrell, I became felt like I was a Craig Kimbrell guy. I'm not going to be the Trevor Rogers guy. Trevor Rogers had a 4-something ERA last year before the trade.
4.53, I believe.
Terrible in 4 starts with a new team. Basically, whoever I talked to last in the offseason was who I thought about most when I thought about Trevor Rogers. So you talk to somebody and be like, I don't know, he's probably just broken. These things happen, guys break. And then I'd be like, oh man, what did they do? And then you talk to other people who were like, this guy had serious physical issues. His solution to them was not really being able to do any kind of lifting or working out or anything like that. He also, when the Orioles got him and got their arms around him, they realized there was a lot of mechanical work they could do with him, a lot of delivery stuff that they could do with him, drill stuff that is common practice that Orioles farm hands do all the time. Trevor Rogers not only had never done, but was taking time to do it. And it's a humbling experience to be a big leaguer and realize that there's so much for you to learn. But he was also hurt. He was injured. He comes back. I think even last year there was a little bit of he's not going to be pumping 96 in AAA. I don't know that there was ever going to be that time when he was you basically being DL Hall and be I'm the best left-handed pitcher AAA has ever seen. Bring me up to the big leagues. But I think there were indicators that he was going to be there, that there was some upside, that it was fixable to the extent that the Orioles hoped. And it's 1 start. He could be terrible And if you're pitching on Friday night, which I believe is what he'd be doing here, if he pitches on Friday night here and he's terrible, he's going to get booed like Charlie Morton got booed and Kyle Gibson got booed, because one start doesn't really erase everything bad that happened. But I think the idea of him, the trade was viewed as bad because of things that mostly didn't involve him. It was viewed as bad because the Orioles needed Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers last year. It's viewed as bad because Kyle Stowers is going to be an all-star this year. They didn't, at the time of that trade, need Kyle Stowers and Connor Norby. They needed a guy who was going to be, who had been an all-star caliber pitcher and was going to be in their organization for multiple years. And if he is that, which I'm not saying he's going to be, if he is able to pitch in the Orioles rotation for the rest of this year and not stink, that is what they need.
Yeah. The last few moves, that trade, you add in the Charlie Morton signing, Dylan Carlson signing to some extent, although the risk was very low, but especially that trade, the Trevor Rogers for Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers trade, was looking like an F- for a long time, because the Orioles traded potential all-star Kyle Stowers and potential future good big leaguer Connor Norby, like two actual big leaguers for a nothing burger in Trevor Rogers, 4 bad starts and wasn't doing anything this year, was down in AAA after getting hurt. It's looking like it might not be an F-. The Orioles just can't have some F-. The Charlie Morton signing was looking like an F-. That is getting closer, hopefully, as his ERA ticks closer and closer to 7 and hopefully maybe 6 and 5. That is looking like less of an F-.
Yeah.
So the Orioles just did not strike out as hard on as many of these moves. They just can't have missed. They can't have whiffed that badly. And the reason that they are where they are for record-wise is that the results have been so skewed to that first percentile worth of outcomes, like we talked about last week. This is the worst, beyond the worst possible case scenario for Charlie Morton's start to the season. This is beyond the worst possible scenario for Trevor Rogers. Like you said, he was a 4.5 ERA guy last year. Yeah. Is that great? No, but that's not terrible. That's better than what Kyle Gibson gave you in 2023 when he started on opening day and pitched in the playoffs. Like, that's a serviceable pitcher.
Oh my God, Michael I signs up for a 4.5 in blood right now.
Yes,
he would sign up for it with his blood.
Yeah, and Trevor Rogers doesn't have to give you 6 1/3 scoreless innings every time. Charlie Morton, hopefully, in order to just skew his stats back to normal, can give you closer to a quality start. But if he gives you 6 innings, 3 runs, that's perfectly acceptable. That wins you baseball games. It's not ideal, but hopefully it can keep you satiated until you get guys like, Kyle Gibson back, until you maybe, we'll see, but get Grayson Rodriguez back, until Zach Eflin starts to look like his pre-injury self. So that's what this team was expecting. Like, we've said it before, they weren't shooting for great with this rotation. They were shooting for fine. And they got terrible. That was the downside. But now they're starting to get hopefully a little bit closer to fine.
Yeah. And I think back to when I started covering this team in 2016, it was like the era of like the Dakota projection would come out and everybody laugh. And there would be a whole day of like everyone in the clubhouse and Buck talking shit about all those nerds that don't know anything. So I wanted to do a story of like, why does this happen? And the explanation was basically like, you can predict pretty reasonably over the course of like using a lot of historical data, the amount of things that will happen over a 162 game season for a baseball player. Wouldn't put 25, 26 of them together. That's what it will look like. What you can't predict is the sequencing. So like, you can't predict that like every time Darren O'Day comes into the game with 2 guys on that the starters put on because they're letting 2 guys on every inning, that none of those guys are going to score and that the Orioles will go on to win the game. Like so the amount of things that happen are one thing and the sequencing of them are another. And what has happened here is that all the bad things that could possibly happen have happened in the first 2 months of the season, and they might continue to be bad. They might also not. And like over the course of the year, we might end up with a bunch of guys who are like in the mid-4s rotation wise. And you're like, that's a fine rotation. That didn't turn out to be terrible. And then we're going to back weight it. And like, since Memorial Day, the Orioles rotations, blah, 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 blah. And like, it'll all be true. And it won't matter because all the bad things happen and those led to losses. And sometimes you can have good things happen and those could occur in losses too. And then there will be too many losses and the season will end in the last weekend of September and everyone will feel like this was a total waste. But like, I only say this because everything bad that like all the bad stuff is concentrated for Charlie Morton, for Trevor Rogers, for Dylan Carlson, who probably had not gone 20 some plate appearances without a hit in his life. It also didn't really matter to the Baltimore Orioles of 2025 that he did that because they were terrible in so many other ways. But like, that's not going to happen again. If all this stuff keeps not happening again, this team is bound to get better.
Yeah, and you said it very well, I think, a couple weeks ago when they fired Brandon Hyde, which was good stuff is going to happen eventually just by nature of the fact that you can't have so many terrible things keep happening over and over again. You can't get these outlier performances from so many guys and not expect things to bounce back and regress towards the mean in some way positively. It's also going to coincide with the beginning of the Tony Mansolino era, but that won't be because Tony Mansolino took over as interim manager. Correlation does not always equal causation. And Andy Kuska wrote a great story in the BaltimoreBanner.com recently where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months about the clubhouse's reaction to Brandon Hyde and Tim Cousins getting fired. And he quotes several players that say Brandon Hyde never lost this clubhouse. Brandon Hyde may have been publicly expressing confidence in his team, but at the same time, behind closed doors, he was calling them out. He was saying this lineup needs to take more responsibility. They then took that message and said, we're going to have a players only meeting the day before he got fired, where they discussed all their issues and aired it all out. Yeah. And Brandon Hyde even went so far, according to a source, as to say that the league begun to think that the Orioles were soft. That's the kind of thing that I think fans had wanted to see maybe from Brandon Hyde more publicly, but it's clear that there were things going on behind the scenes. And I remember when Tony Mansolino had his first post-game press conference, he said, everybody's going to look for a jolt now that Brandon Hyde got fired, but there have been plenty of jolts behind these walls before that. That's clearly, to me, what Tony Mansolino was referencing. So maybe we're now seeing the delayed results, the delayed positive effects of maybe some of the final messages of Brandon Hyde and maybe some of the just natural improvement of guys who have been playing the worst baseball of their career for inexplicable reasons.
Yeah, and I was going through doing part of the newsletter last night, and that story that Andy did was great. And one of the parts that stuck out to me was the contents of that meeting after that terrible Nationals loss was like, we just got to stop like wallowing in this. That's what this team has been doing. If you want to watch, it's quiet in the dugout because they've been depressed about how this is going. They have, they stop. They not down tools, but like their ability to come back in these games has lessened because they go down and they're like, well, here we go again. Like part of the contents of that meeting was to say, we got to stop this. Like, yeah, that's what you saw, even in those, I am, it makes my stomach turn to even think about saying this, but like when they were not just rolling over in like 7th, 8th, and 9th of these games that are getting smoked in, like that they were actually scoring runs in those was like, that was not an encouraging sign for the Baltimore Orioles. That was not something anyone can latch onto. But what it was a complete departure from how the first 6-7 weeks of the season had gone, because these games have no juice once they go down in them. And for these hitters to be the kind of hitters that, they don't use the little like filter thing at the top of a spreadsheet. I have done this. I've done literally what I'm about to say, but like when they're going to arbitration hearings, they're not like, let's filter out all the stats from the games you're losing by 5 runs in. Then we'll pay you based on that. Like, nope, those homers count. Those runs count. Those walks count. Everything that you do in those situations counts the same. So might as well just do it. And like, they weren't doing that. And I think that was part of the thing that, it seems like Brandon Hyde was saying, I believe it was our old friend Austin Wynns, who when they came in here after that, like they scored a million runs, was basically loss. Like, yeah, we knew they were in a bad way. And like, we just wanted to get on them because we didn't think they would come back.
Yeah.
And like, he would say that because it's true, and it is true. It was true.
And Austin Wynns has been here for some pretty terrible baseball.
He's seen some bad baseball.
Yeah,
he's seen some bad baseball. I'm having funny Austin Wynns memories. He was a great guy. He still is a great guy. Miss him. So I think that was something that really stuck out to me from that part of that story. Was like, let's just stop. Like, let's just get over this. Like, and it seems like maybe they have.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the hitting philosophy that this Orioles team has. Let's dive into the good stuff, because John, I want to have this conversation because I feel like we talk around the Orioles hitting philosophy a lot, but we haven't talked a whole lot about it on the podcast. You've written extensively about it in previous publications, as well as the Baltimore Banner, about where their hitting philosophy comes from. And I particularly noted a mention that you had last week where you said, firing the manager doesn't change the Orioles hitting philosophy. The Orioles hitting department is completely separate from the manager's office, as well as the pitching department is completely separate from the manager's office. It comes from the top down. This is an organizational philosophy. The things that they teach in Baltimore are the things that they teach in Norfolk and in Bowie and all the way down the ladder. And they're things that they believe to be true. And I wanted to talk about it because we've seen some outstanding results because of it. This is what got all these guys to the big leagues. Jordan Westburg, Colton Cowser, Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, all turned out to be outstanding prospects. Jackson Holiday, because of this. And we have also seen them succeed in the big leagues because of this. The first half of 2024 really feels like what we're chasing here. It really feels like the best possible outcome for these philosophies coming true. That was when the Orioles were first in baseball in slugging percentage and in home runs, all while still not walking a whole lot. They were just they were second to last in walk percentage. But it is all of these now philosophies that feels like are contributing to the Orioles struggling. And I want to ask the question of, first off, what is the Orioles hitting philosophy? Who are the people in place that are instilling this hitting philosophy, that are teaching this hitting philosophy? And then is it working or is it failing? Is this something that the Orioles need to change? Mike Elias said when he spoke with the media the other day, they're looking internally at everything and whether this is something that they're going to look at. It's something that they need to address, or is this something that they just need to stick with and eventually the results will come out of it? So let's start first off with some of the guys that are involved, some of the people that are involved in instilling this hitting philosophy. The Orioles had a couple hitting coaches in Matt Borg-Schulte and Ryan Fuller in 2023 and 2024 that led to some awesome results. They turned the page this past offseason, and they turned the job over to Cody Asche, who was somebody who came up through their system as a coach. He was a former big leaguer for the Phillies and the White Sox, then was the Phillies single A hitting coach in 2021. The Orioles hired him away to be their upper level hitting coordinator in 2022, promoted to offensive strategy coach in 2023, and then promoted to hitting coach in 2025. You've talked with Cody Asche before. I've talked with Cody Asche. What are your impressions of him as a hitting coach in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think he is of the mind of the Orioles front office. And I guess I just want to push back too, like the moving on from the hitting coaches, like Ryan Borg-Schulte or Matt Borg-Schulte was in the mix to come back, and he took other offers. He was interviewing with multiple teams. Contract seemed like it was expiring, because I guess that's the only way you could be the hitting coach of another team when you were the hitting coach of the Orioles, if your contract is running out,
or if they let you go, I guess.
Yeah, or they, but he was in the mix to come back, and he did not. And Ryan Fuller
made the choice of his own volition, I believe, to leave. Yes, according to our reporting.
Yes, he did.
The Orioles didn't necessarily move on from them so much as those two maybe moved on themselves.
Yeah, and there could be some like this will happen if,
there's some gray area.
Yeah. But I would say, Cody Asche is somebody who brought like an outside philosophy when the Orioles brought him in from the Philly side, but is somebody who has a lot of major league experience. He has the same kind of philosophies. He wants to do damage. I thought it was pretty instructive last year. He was asked, towards the end of the season, as the team wasn't doing as well as they had been in the first half, he was asked if he wanted the team to walk more, and he said, yeah, but I'm sure other teams would want to also hit fewer home runs too. So like it's a balance. And he actually went through, and I sent this to you yesterday as we were going through all these. He went through and basically laid out what he wants. He would want this to be. I kind of always assumed it was a mission statement of sorts for what he wanted to say. And I'm stalling as I'm trying to find it so I could read it. And he said,
I think I have it here. Of course, we want to see more walks. Other teams would probably like to see us hit less homers. That's the way it goes. But yeah, I would love to lead the league in homers. I'd love to lead the league in batting average and walks and slug. And we'd have the lowest chase rate and the highest meatball swing. But you've got to factor in your lineup and help guys do what they do best all the time without solely focusing on weaknesses. Because if you tell a guy what he's bad at enough, eventually he just believes that's who he is instead of showing them what they're good at and make sure that they're really good at that.
Yeah.
Unquote.
So that was basically to me like his like mission statement before he became the hitting coach. He was his hitting strategy coach at that point. A lot of teams had those, and he was like, a lot of people cared that the Orioles had one for some reason last year. I think that is like a really good indication of like, okay, that's what they want to be looking at. So like meatball swing, like not chasing, hitting the ball hard on the line. If we're talking about how this was all built, he was the hitting coordinator along with Anthony Villa, who's now the farm director. In 2022, I believe, was their first year working together. And Cody Ashe brought like a major league experience overlay to this, that, you know, he was in as they were working together. And I think part of the reason he became the hitting strategy coach in the big leagues that one year that he was in the minors, one of the things he was able to do well and that the Orioles existing hitting apparatus really valued was the ability to help very simply, very effectively help hitters and help players understand what a pitcher was going to try to do to them and how to combat that. He had played in the big leagues. He knew, he had lived that life. He knew exactly what was going to happen. And he was instrumental, I think, in kind of accelerating the game planning prep on the minor league side.
Yeah, and then they have a couple other former big leaguers on his staff as well. And Tommy Joseph, who was his former teammate with the Philadelphia Phillies, a former catcher, who was the hitting coach in the New York Mets organization, lower levels than the Giants high A team. Then he was the assistant hitting coach for Seattle Mariners big league team in 2024 before he got hired away as the assistant hitting coach in 2025. And then Sherman Johnson, who is also on the staff as an assistant hitting coach / upper level hitting coordinator, guy who played one season in the majors in 2018 for the LA Angels, and somebody who worked his way up through the Orioles ranks, was the hitting coach for AA Bowie. It was AA Bowie at the time. Now it's AA Chesapeake in 2023, then upper level hitting coordinator. Now he is assistant hitting coach as well as upper level hitting coordinator. And then a guy who is pulling the strings as well on the farm is Anthony Villa, a guy that you just mentioned as somebody who has been with this organization now for several years. So you've got Ashe, you've got Joseph, you've got Sherman Johnson, and you've got Anthony Villa as some of the guys that are instilling these philosophies. So it is a lot of guys who have been steeped in this organizational philosophy for a few years. Joseph is really the only new guy in 2025. But the guys that are influencing the big league hitters are guys that have stuck around because they believe in the Orioles hitting philosophy, and clearly the organization believes that they teach it well.
Yeah, and in some cases, you know, they developed it. We remember 2019, it was, you know, there were Edgertronic cameras and TrackMan, and they were actually using computers, and the pitchers all of a sudden got really good, and the hitters were not really getting that same level of attention. And then 2020, they were like, okay, we're going to do this. Like, we're going to, you know, I did a story in spring training with it. It was basically like, there's no coordinator, there's no hierarchy. Like, we're just going to do stuff, and like whatever works is going to be our hitting program. And then there was a pandemic, and that really accelerated things. They got to use Altsite and Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman, but guys like Ryan Fuller, Anthony Villa were really able to form what this program was going to be based on what they wanted it to be. There was no bad things you could do. So they developed this, and they developed it around the ideas. And I think the front office not dictated this, but it was certainly supported in thought and spirit of like the highest like OPS comes from hitting balls over the plate hard on a line. So you control the strike zone. You don't swing at bad pitches because you can't do a lot of damage on them. You don't swing at bad pitches because they're not strikes, and it's okay. They have to come in the strike zone if you don't swing at those bad pitches, and you hit the ball hard on a line because that is historically, those are the types of batted balls that create the most run value. And you do those things consistently over the course of a season, and you get to where the Orioles want to be. I think there's other aspects to it. One of my favorite things to do, and I guess we're talking about the program in general. One of my favorite things to do towards the end when I go to a minor league game, I remember some really good answers from like Kobe Mayo when he was at Bowie. I asked Vance Honeycutt last week, like, what's your favorite thing to do? Because they basically have like a Cheesecake Factory menu of like drills and like stuff that you were exposed to over the course of, you know, being in the complex and being in Delmarva and being in Aberdeen. And like, as you get older, it's less prescribed. It's not like we're doing foam balls on the field on this day. And it's, what do you want to do? So I love asking people, like, what do you like to do? Like, what's your thing? I've talked to Jordan Westberg about it as well. That was a fun story, mostly because he basically like was like not really around, but then he heard Colton Cowser tell him the version of Jordan Westberg's routine that Colton Cowser told me, and he was like, "No, that's not right. I can't let Colton Cowser's version of my routine be represented in your story. I need to tell you exactly what I'm going to do." And I had like 4 minutes. I was like, "Cool, thanks." But you know, Kobe Mayo, for example, was like, I love our 2-strike runners. I like 2-out runners scoring position. We do a full round of BP where it's like mixed BP, so you're not just getting fastballs, but like 2 outs, second and third. And based on the contact you make, you can get those runs. If you hit a ball that's going to get caught, it's an out. If you hit a ball that's going to be a double, you get 2 runs, 3 runs, 1 run, whatever. And they do those types of drills. Vance Honeycutt is basically saying he really likes like the extreme angle work where basically a pitcher will be like off one side or another, and you can really work on seeing the ball come in and like bat path type stuff that way. He said he didn't like, they put like basically like a pitching machine like at field level and did foam balls that were basically like extreme four seam, like replicate. But like that's really hard.
Like high spin rate.
Yeah. And the foam balls, like the dot balls. I don't remember what they call those. Maybe they call them foam balls, but those spin even more. And like, these are things that our professional hitters are doing, and they're embarrassing them because they can't do it, but it's really challenging. And like, they're trying to create those realistic but challenging situations outside of game action to prepare hitters to do that. And that is kind of the hitting philosophy in a nutshell.
Yeah. And I remember talking back when Gunnar Henderson was at Bowie to him about that foam ball approach. And he was talking about how it really helped him deal with pitches that had very high spin rates. These four-seam fastballs that appear to rise that don't break much because they have very high spin rates, and it helps him hit balls up higher in the strike zone because of that. Guess who hits balls higher in the strike zone better than almost anybody in baseball? Gunnar Henderson. I mean, it's these little things that they learned along the way that have helped them. But so far right now, John, we're in 2025. We're a couple months into the season. Things are not working out great for this offense right now. They are coming into Monday's games. They're 25th in runs per game, 22nd in batting average, 11th in homers, 19th in slugging percentage. And you just mentioned some of the Orioles' big hitting philosophies, and we can break it down into a few points. Great swing decisions, hard contact, hitting balls that do damage, so that are within players' wheelhouses, good swing decisions, hitting balls in the air. And it's some of those things that they preach that they are not really doing. Let's talk about swing decisions. The Orioles, throughout their farm system, have preached only hit the balls that you know you can do damage on. Don't hit the balls that are on the edges of the strike zone. Don't hit the balls that you know you can't do a whole lot with. Well, right now, the Orioles have the third highest strikeout percentage in baseball. They have the 7th lowest walk percentage. They have the 8th highest whiff percentage in baseball, only slightly above average in chase percentage. They're in the bottom half of the league in meatball swing percentage. So the balls that they should be doing damage on, they're not doing an incredible amount of, they're not swinging at them, first of all, and they're not doing damage on those pitches as well. Now, one factor I want to say in the Orioles' favor is that they currently lead the league in pitches per plate appearance. And that's something Cody Ashley talked about as well, about working each plate appearance, working at bats, grinding out at bats, seeing a lot of pitches. Even if the end result of the at bat isn't ideal, you strike out, whatever it is. Hey, if you saw 10 pitches, you saw a lot of this guy's offerings, you get his pitch count up. There are a lot of benefits towards grinding out at bats. So the Orioles lead the league in pitches per plate appearance. But their swing decisions, John, feel like they have been lacking so far this year. And I don't want to discount the fact that this offense right now is missing Colton Cowser. They're missing Jordan Westberg. They're missing a lot of their pieces that they thought were going to be here throughout the entire season. But starting with swing decisions, that's not an ideal outcome for a team that preaches having good plate discipline.
Correct. Yeah. And I just have the at bat counts in front of us, and we're talking about, Jordan Westberg grinds out at bats like nobody else. Colton Cowser,
awesome two-strike hitter.
Yeah. Colton Cowser is somebody who does these things. There's more swing and miss there than I think anybody thought there would be. But like the players who I think you can reasonably say that Gunnar Henderson takes a great at bat. You can reasonably say that Adley Rutschman takes very good at bats, even though he doesn't impact the ball the way that he did. Or he's not getting the results, I should say.
Sure.
The batted ball profile does not match the quality of the at bats. Is probably the fairest way to say that. Ryan O'Hearn takes a great at bat. Cedric Mullins takes pretty good at bats. Ryan Mountcastle does not take good at bats.
He never has.
He's not. That's not him. That's not what he's going to do. Heston Kjerstad does not take great at bats. These are, I think, whomever. Ramon Urias takes pretty good at bats. Jorge Mateo doesn't really take good at bats.
No.
We can basically go down the line and like there is not a quorum of like good at bat takers. Or there's not the amount that there should be. I would say is probably the right way to say that. But all those things are true, and I think it's challenging to evaluate the Orioles based on like this year of not having Jordan Westbrook for most of it. The Ryan Mountcastle like came back from vertigo. Was it 2 years ago? Was a swing decision monster, and he also was like that was the best he's been his entire career, and I think that's pretty instructive. I think that you can kind of take things and put them into different buckets. Take like the good goes in the good bucket. The injured goes in the injured bucket, and I think that the Adley Rutschman goes in like the Adley Rutschman bucket because it's like who knows. I look at those stats are not what they're seeking right now. I would say that until we see how this looks when it looks the way they think it's going to look lineup wise and like circumstance wise, it's hard to judge. If this podcast was rolling along as like a 5-star reviewed podcast for like 3 years. That'd
be great.
Yeah, it would be great. We would probably be rich and famous.
Sure.
There'd be a bunch of stuff on the walls probably at that point. It would be, this would be not a multi-purpose room. This would be our room that we're recording in.
Sure.
All this stuff, very realistic, very definitely going to happen. And then all of a sudden it was like me with a Metro reporter once a week or like you with a photographer every week. It would still feel the same. It would still be called the Banner Baseball Show. And people would be like, this doesn't seem right. What are these guys doing? And we would be like, well, when it was what it's supposed to be, it was awesome. Like, let's keep it going. Like, but why would we change? It was great when it was supposed to be, when it was what it was supposed to be. And this is not to denigrate, Metro reporters or photographers. I'm sure they'd all be fine podcasters.
Sure.
And it would just not be the same. And I think that is probably where the Orioles are, because Michael Elias said all those things about reevaluating like everything and the hitting philosophy and all that stuff. And they did that in the offseason.
Right.
And they tweaked personnel and they tweaked some things, I think. But I think they also realized like this is what we believe and this is what we're going to do. And I don't know that these results are going to change that, even if they are poor.
Right. So the players that are in place are less the result of the Orioles hitting philosophy than the results. Keep in mind that these are not the guys that they expected to have in their lineup every day.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that these are not guys who have been through their system for a long amount of time. I mean, think of Emmanuel Rivera, Dylan Carlson as somebody who's been through this, played a lot this season that probably has not been steeped enough in these Orioles hitting philosophy.
Yeah. And I'm also looking at though, 175 at bats each for Ryan Mountcastle and Adley Rutschman. You are planning on having that by this time of the season and you expect them to be better.
Right.
And
yeah.
like those are the challenging things for completely different reasons, the Ryan Mountcastle and Adley Rutschman's ones. But they have a lot of and I think that's part of the challenge. They have a lot of what they want in place, and it's still not what they want, but I still don't know that it's a representative. I don't know that this is representative still.
Right. And they're still, the swing decisions are not ideal. There are a couple other things that are not ideal as well. We talked about they want to hit the ball in the air, and that's something that they did very well last year when they were leading the league in home runs for a long time. Right now, they have the 10th highest fly ball percentage in baseball. They have the 3rd lowest line drive percentage in baseball, and they have the 15th highest ground ball percentage. So they're not like the Washington Nationals where they're hitting everything on the ground, but they're definitely hitting more balls on the ground than they would want to be right now. They're not hitting as many balls in the air, and they're not hitting as many line drives.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are again candidate people who are responsible. Like Gunnar Henderson's line drive rate is low comparatively to where it would be otherwise. I think, I don't think he's a guy that hits the ball on the ground 50% of the time historically. I'm looking at that as I'm talking about it, and I'm probably going to find that is true. Let's see. This is great audio, huh? But last year, he's 46% last year, but not 50. And his line drive rate was 20%, not 15. So those are real things that you look at and say, why is this happening? I don't have it in front of me on everybody. I'm going to get yours going. I'm going to just keep. I'm gonna
well, the other thing is,
how it looks.
In addition to fly ball percentage, in addition to swing decisions, I mean, hitting the ball hard has been an organizational philosophy for a long time, and it should be, because hitting the ball hard is a major factor in the result of the plate appearance. The Orioles are still hitting the ball pretty hard. They're 4th in baseball in hard hit percentage, and they're 4th in average exit velocity. But they're not seeing the results. And at what point does the body of evidence suggest that perhaps the Orioles are over-indexing hard hit rate?
Yeah, and I think that, you know, they've talked about this on some of the broadcasts where, like, congrats, you hit a ball hard on the ground to the second baseman, which is exactly what the pitcher wants. And that is because they threw a pitch. Like, you have to swing at strikes if they're there. And I think there's probably more of a balance to that than we think. But I think that there's probably somewhere, if we're sliding the scale, you don't abandon that approach because hitting the ball hard has not worked. Because, like, just it and this is, we had this conversation last year, and we've had this conversation again, you know, this year. Like, what is the alternative? Like, are you gonna say just like
make soft contact,
stick the bat out there?
Yeah.
Just stick the bat out there, hope something good happens. You know, what good's gonna happen? A major league infielder is going to pick the ball up and throw it to first, and you're gonna do one of those, like, soft jogs that, like, you don't even make it to first. You're just gonna keep, you're just gonna roll around back to the dugout. Like, it's not going to work out. It's just not going to work out. So at that point, what are you going to tell guys to do that's different? And I think that's what they're struggling with right now. And I think there's maybe, like, more of a game situation overlay to what they are trying to do. I think when I know they're especially younger players who are learning, say, okay, I know I'm going to get a slider here because I'm very well prepared for this game. And then they get it, and it's a bad slider, and they swing anyways because they see slider and they're like, go slider.
Yeah.
And then it's terrible pitch. I think there's probably some kind of, like, balance, but over-indexing hard contacts potentially. But what is the alternative? It's kind of the question that I would pose back to that.
That's fair. And on an individual level, I mean, you look at the Orioles offense as a whole, and they are massively underperforming. And certainly you could blame some of it on some of the pieces in place, like we've said, some of the injuries. But you are also seeing some regression from a lot of guys that you are not expecting to regress, and a lot of guys that you were going to rely heavily upon. I mean, this team has invested so much in the hitters in this organization. They've drafted hitters high over and over and over again. And so to see all of these guys that they have invested high picks in not pan out or regress suggests that there is something wrong here, whether it is the way that the message is being taught or the message itself. Ryan Mountcastle, like you said, he's never going to be a great at bat. He's never going to work a count. But the fact that he can't hit for power anymore out of nowhere is baffling to me. He hasn't hit a home run in the month of May. The fact that Adley Rutschman we did a whole podcast on Adley Rutschman, and we couldn't figure it out, because the fact that he's hitting 211 right now and hopefully did not suffer a concussion the other day, but the fact that his results have not been there has been utterly baffling. The fact that Heston Kjerstad, somebody who hit the ball in the air so well in his minor league career, early in his big league career, is hitting everything on the ground and is whiffing on way too many pitches. The fact that Jackson Holliday needed his dad to point out something wrong with his swing and to correct it that way, and not to get it from somebody on the Orioles staff, is another concerning factor. So there are all of these things individually that these are not the Emmanuel Riveras of the world. These are not the Dylan Carlsons of the world. These are former number one prospects.
Yeah.
These are former top prospects that the Orioles are saying, you're going to be in the lineup most days, and you need to carry us for the next 3-4 years. And they're not delivering. I know we're 2 months into the season, but you combine these 2 months with the last 3 months of 2024, and it seems like some of these hitters that benefited so much from the Orioles hitting philosophy throughout the minor leagues and earlier in their big league careers are regressing.
Yes. Let's work backwards. Jackson Holliday got the toe tap that has also helped him be on time for major league fastballs from the Orioles hitting staff. They combine those things, and they are, we're talking about a 22-year-old major league leadoff hitter, which is pretty good.
Two guys that are not here anymore in Ryan Fuller and Matt Borg-Schulte.
Yes. I believe I think Cody Ashley might have been the one who did that, but I'm not sure. I don't remember specifically. I would also say that, you know, if we're talking about like over-indexing things, like the benefit of Matt Holliday's like influence on Jackson Holliday in general might be in that category. But he gets full marks for this one. Heston Kjerstad, I don't understand. I mean, we've had this conversation about how his particular offensive approach was pretty counter to everything that they teach guys, and they were like, it's okay, he does it. We're finding out now that it's not okay. Adley Rutschman, like you said, had a whole podcast. Not really sure what's going on, although he definitely has been better since that happened. So shout out to us. Ryan Mountcastle, as I'm looking at it now, might have been ruined by the wall being fixed.
How?
I'm glad you asked.
Thanks.
So Ryan Mountcastle is pulling the ball in the air 18.7% of the time this year, which is way higher than last year. It was 10.1% because he could not do that. He was pretty adamant as this was all happening that, his approach had to change. You're always looking for like the big part of the field. That's like a baseball thing that guys say. Ryan Mountcastle would try to drive the ball to right center. He is not really doing that. I looked at this because his spray chart is not what it has been in the past. He basically has one wall ball extra base hit to right field and everything else is pulled. So how has the fact that he can now theoretically hit it over the wall in left field again made it so that his approach has changed? I'm not sure, but I'm going to find out. I know Ryan Mountcastle's watching this and listening to it, and I'm going to find out. But that seems really counterintuitive to what you want. If there was one knock on Ryan Mountcastle for most of his career, it's he doesn't hit the ball super hard on the pull side. That's something that you do if you're a power hitter. That's how you make your money.
Yep.
And it's not something he's been able to do, but he was a productive hitter. Otherwise, now he can theoretically do it again, and it's not. So it's just something that, as we're talking, that I'm looking at. But these things are all true. Broadly, they are true that there are more players here than not who should be performing better. And we might just be talking about a team. There might not be, Gunnar Henderson might be on that like A1 tier. And we might be talking about 4, 5, 6 guys who are not even on the next tier, but maybe the tier below that. And like, if you have that many good players, one really great player, and that many good players, you can be a really good team. But if you aren't having those top level guys, that's a conversation that might need to be had. And how do you change that? How do you fix that? I don't know.
That's a little scary too, because I think go back a year and the Orioles thought that they had at least one upper tier guy in Gunnar and probably 3 second tier guys.
Yeah.
I mean, 3 guys that you thought were going to make like 4 or 5 all-star games.
Yeah. And they still
can. They still can.
They still can. I think those types of guys are the guys who make, I think you were talking about like all-star MVP, like we're talking about like MVP,
MVP's Gunnar,
perennial all-star,
occasional
all-star. And occasional all-star means some years you're an all-star and some years you're not. Do I think, if we're talking about occasional all-star, do I think that Colton Cowser is going to have a better career than Anthony Santander? I think so. That means he makes 2 all-star teams. Like, is he going to be an all-star more times than Anthony Santander? Probably. Is Jordan Westbrook going to have a better and more productive career than Austin Hayes? You would think there's a good chance that could happen. I'm trying to think of like a good comparison, like a person to compare Cedric Mullins to. Is Jackson Holliday going to have a better, it's going to be a completely different career because I think he's going to be a free agent by the time Cedric Mullins was like an established big leaguer, but like whose Orioles career will be better, Jackson Holliday's or Cedric Mullins? Is like that probably Jackson Holliday. Might it be close, but like, might he end up being better? Those are the types of things where you get into like semantics, and it's a challenging thing to talk about, but it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah. And I think to kind of bring it back home to the hitting philosophy, it's so difficult to tell the difference between the talent and what is being done with the talent. It is so difficult to parse what is the coaching staff's effects on the player and what does the player need to do better. And in this instance, it's a case where all of these guys are underperforming. And so I think naturally people look at what is the common denominator here. And the common denominator is this is a hitting philosophy that has been in place for several years that has affected all of these guys. These are hitting coaches that have been here, with the exception of Tommy Joseph, in this organization for several years now. And so when you see all of these guys struggle, the natural inclination is to say, well, there's something broken with the process that got them here.
Yeah.
And we don't know what that is. The organization's trying to figure it out. We're trying to figure it out. I think we're going to see better results. I think that this is not a broken hitting philosophy. I think this is a philosophy that makes sense on paper. But at a certain point, you're going to hit a critical mass of evidence where you say, this isn't working. Something needs to be changed. Maybe these aren't the right hitters for this to be instilled. And you have to change it. So we'll get to that point eventually. I want to see how the rest of the season plays out. I want to see how the next 2 months play out. And I want to see better results, frankly, from the guys that we mentioned. I want to see Ryan Mountcastle hit the ball over the fence. I want to see Heston Kjerstad hit the ball in the air. I want to see Adley Rutschman look like the Adley Rutschman from 2 years ago. I want to see Gunnar Henderson look closer to the MVP candidate that he was last year. And I want to see Jackson Holliday continue to rake the way he has been. So I think we could see that. We need to see it soon.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd just say to bring this full circle, I think it was in like August, there was a huge like Athletic article about how teams were like, how the way the Orioles like develop hitters was like the envy of the league.
Yeah.
And like everyone was trying to copy it. And I think that remains true. I think we're going to see them draft more players of the same archetypes that they've drafted the last few years. The guys who make crazy hard contact, but not a lot of it. The guys who make a lot of contact, but not hard. And they're going to try to find that sweet spot of getting these guys to be able to do all the things they want to do. And it's going to be the same. And you know what? I'm not sitting here right now saying that's not something that should be happening.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for indulging us in that super inside baseball conversation. I think on future podcasts, we'll focus more on individual players. We'll focus more on individual results on the field, but I wanted to take a step back and dive into the organizational philosophies in place here, because that's something that, John, you know a whole lot about, and that's something that is guiding everything that we see on the baseball field. We're going to do our minor league check-in right after we get a quick word from our sponsor.
For the 5th year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, John, let's talk about a guy who has been in this Orioles organization for several years now, and that is one Creed Willems. He's only 22 years old, despite the fact that he was an 8th-round pick in 2021, a catcher. He was taken out of high school, and we've seen him bump up different levels of the organization with, I would say road bumps every time that he gets to a new level of the organization.
For sure.
It has taken him a little bit of time every time that he has made a jump to the next level to adjust, which is understandable for a high school draft pick for a very young guy. And he got called up to Double-A Chesapeake last year, back when it was Double-A Bowie, and he struggled. Things are turning around for him this year. He's hitting .272 with 6 homers and an .863 OPS in 38 Double-A games this year. This is also coming off a great Arizona Fall League stint last year. John, this is a guy that we've both been around for a long time, a very fun guy to talk to, a guy that a lot of his teammates love, and a guy that the fans have loved every stop along the way. And it's good to see that he has continued to progress. I think there were some times where we were wondering, is this guy going to stick in this organization, or is he closer to on the outs? Right now, the results are showing that he might be on his way to Norfolk by season's end.
Yeah, I think that his path has been one that's instructive of just how hard it is to, be a young player. Like he would have been in last year's draft class as a college player. And that's something that, he was hitting really well in Aberdeen at that point. And by the time most of his age level peers were getting, his draft class, the Vance Honeycutts, were getting to Aberdeen to get a taste of what was going to happen in their first full season. He was in Bowie hitting home runs, and his development has been one where he's gotten to a level, struggled badly, learned the lessons of that level, internalized them, had the off season to work on it, come back, destroyed the level, spent more time, gets bumped up. Last year when he got to Bowie, he did a lot better, which was kind of a departure from that pattern of what happened in Delmarva and Aberdeen. But it got to the point now, and he's somebody who's pretty polarizing for scouts, it's fair to say. When you have things that you obviously need to work on and other teams exploit them, and scouts sit on the series for a week and just see it happen over and over and over again, it's hard for them to be like, yeah, no, that's good. I like that. I think there's some questions defensively, as there are for any minor league catcher, basically, who's not named like Adley Rutschman or one of those like nailed on like catcher guys. But I viewed him, and I don't know if I've said this, but it seems I viewed him this year as kind of like an international prospect type. These guys, very, very up and down. They come in with a ton of hype. They get a lot of money. You don't really hear a lot from them as they're like going through the complexes, and then they can struggle as they get to full season ball, yada, yada, yada. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, but once you get to AA, like we're going to find out what you are as a player. And now he's still young for his level. He's at a level of competition that's challenging from him, and he's having success with it. It's one of those things where you kind of, this year seems like it's going to be like the reevaluation year of like, okay, is this, what do they have here? Is it going to be just a lefty bench bat who hits the smoke, like hits not out of the ball when he makes contact, and there's some swing and miss there, but he's not striking out a ton this year. I think that's
his strikeout rate is lower this year than it was last year.
Yeah, like 13.6% swinging strike rate. Not great, not terrible. There's been lower years. There's also been higher years. So you look at all that type of stuff, and I think he's going to end up being kind of like if we're going to be able to if he makes it, we're going to be able to, it'll be like a case study in like how this hitting program, to bring it for a full circle, like kind of works. There's fantastic makeup there as well. The Orioles felt good about drafting him and giving him $1 million as a high school player when they did, because they knew that he would be able to take the lumps that he's ultimately had to take and not be fazed by it and not be discouraged by it. He is, by all accounts, been, a fantastic teammate. He's a great guy to have around. Everybody loves Creed. And now the results are matching it. But this is going to be kind of the make or break here for me, where it's like, okay, you're in AA, like you made it to AA. We're about to find out whether you're good or not. And it seems like we're getting an answer that's probably closer to yes than would have been imagined at other points.
Yeah, that AA level can be certainly a breaking point for a lot of prospects. I mean, I think of guys like, Zach Watson, John Rhodes, that just could not get over that AA hump. Nothing to their detriment. It's just very difficult. It's a huge jump to make.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Orioles are locked down at catcher right now with Adley Rutschman in the big leagues. He's only under contract for 2 more years after this year, which is crazy to think about how quickly those years have gone by. And then they have Samuel Basayo, who's in AAA. But it's always good to have catching depth. As we've seen, the Orioles added another catcher in Chadwick Tromp. The O is doing a lot of work there. As Gary Sanchez has been hurt, and as Maverick Canley has not been particularly productive. So always good to have depth at the catcher position. Always good to have better farm pieces that could be trade pieces if you need them. But good for Creed Willems for turning things around. All right, that just about does it. We've been going for just about an hour here on the Banner Baseball Show. Please like, rate, review, subscribe. Any way that you get your podcast, subscribe to John's newsletter, Inside the Dugout, which you can find on thebaltimorebanner.com. $1 for 6 months. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will be back at some point next week. For John Meoli, I'm Paul Mancano. We'll catch you next.